has clearly demonstrated the shift from the cost control and efficiency, and now seeing the evolution of the whole supply chain to governance. Now, what is there for the African farms? I may not logically follow what the presentation is all about, but we can always share the presentations maybe after the participation, since most of the issues had been raised by Prof, but I'll just be making some rejoinders to that aspect. So the question we pose here in our presentation is that why have the farms, organizations, structurally be prepared for the next decade into the trend of the supply chain management? So, like Prof had just said, that to become resilient and to prosper in the supply chain of most organizations in Africa now rests with the ability to navigate the governance system. It's no longer the lower cost farm. So what can African farms or in African farms or we in the who are undertaking research in Africa therefore do, such that we can galvanize most of the farms to participate into navigating the governance system? What has rightly been put up across is that we in Africa should now begin thinking about the regional sourcing, since those are some of the power centers that are now controlling the supply chain systems in Africa. Unlikely enough, in the African, we have the African Continent Free Trade Area, but we also have regional organizations which should be galvanized to champion. That is more or less like the nearshoring, which I think my next presenter will definitely come out and present. The East African communities, the COMESAs, the SADCs, that some of these should be galvanized such that we can have African farms effectively participating into the whole supply chain. And also, we should also try to see how we can borrow diversification, because it's no longer dependence on simply one farm. And this is where exactly Prof had also mentioned about. But with a 3% African global share, Africa is still fundamentally disadvantaged when it gets back on making an impact onto the governance systems globally. But it is our belief that not all is necessarily lost, that we can cross over to the next decade in the supply chain if we undertake some few basic steps on some 3 pillars, which I would like to emphasize. The first pillar in most of our organizations, such that we can be able to cross over, is getting the right people in the right places with the right attitudes, the right human resources in our supply chains. Getting the relevant talent, multi-skilled, that should be able to manage most of our organizations. The human resource. And also to have the resilient farms. What we should also be able to undertake is to have proper organizational designs. That most of our organizations were not meant to handle disruptions into the supply chain. They were simply meant to enhance stability over the years. Now, with most of the supply chain shocks, these are wake-up calls on most of our farms. So we should build resilient supply chains that are responsive and can be predictive to most of the challenges that are also undertaken into this, also faced with supply chain. The last pillar, which I would really love to also re-emphasize, in addition for most of African farms, is that we should be able to leverage technology and replace assumptions with data. I know Prof has said one of the problems in most of the African countries, I know somebody is saying about I can't see the presentation, but it's there. It could be shared. That SMEs face a problem with compliance and customs complexity, and therefore are excluded in the whole supply chain business. But what we can also do is to leverage smart AI systems that have the capacity to navigate the complex customs and regulatory frameworks. And I see tailored specific funds that are now coming to leverage and help most of our small SMEs with AI technologies, third-party logistics, on customs clearance, on navigation. So with all the kind of technologies that are available, we can still have them tailored to help some of our SMEs, especially in the African continent, to take advantage on to beat some of the constraints they tend to face into the supply chain challenges. But what is my takeoff point here? That we, the professionals, and the scholars, and the researchers, and the technocrats now are challenged, both formally and informally, to try and champion the cause of supply chain management. And I think also that's how the Institute of Supply Chain Research also comes in here. That formally we must invite most of the colleagues, wherever we are in organizations, and informally also bring alongside most of the colleagues and champion the core supply chain management across our individual organizations. I know this is something that is still very young, the supply chain management, as a discipline, not more than 20, 25 years in most of our sub-Saharan countries here. But it is our responsibility, therefore, to delve into the nitty-gritties such that we can make the whole supply chain discourse available to most of our colleagues and businesses before we have it as also another discipline that will have more problems than solutions in most of our organizations. So with those few remarks, I want to thank definitely Prof, and also here to say that we have the solutions and we should not despair. All we have to do is take a bit of more time and design strategies that should be able to uplift most of our young farms to beat the new challenges in supply chain management. Thank you very much.